Joining me today is New Hampshire Representative Neal Kurk, who's chairman of the House Finance Committee. Neal, thanks so much.
My pleasure, John. I'm very glad to be here.
You know, I would have loved to have had you the day after the compromise was set, but everybody knows that the budget stalemate is resolved. And I guess I want to spend a little bit of time talking inside baseball, as it metaphorically is. How did the resolution sort of take place? Obviously, you were involved in it as chair of the Finance Committee.
Not quite true. This time it was handled at a higher level. The Senate President and the House Speaker and the Governor, those three individuals
really
were involved.
Sat down.
This budget was somewhat unusual in both the House the House Speaker and the Senate President were members of the Budget Committee of Conference. That's not usually the case. So we had leadership at the highest level getting together. They met throughout the summer, and there was a problem. The governor originally was very concerned with two things about the budget, and this is why she vetoed it. Number one, she thought that the House and Senate were estimating too much money would be carried over from the prior budget and used to balance the budget that she vetoed.
And as I recall, we wouldn't have firm numbers on that until
yesterday.
Yesterday, right?
September 30th.
Much later than when the compromise was reached.
That's correct.
Did we have leading indications that things were changing, or did something else happen?
We didn't as legislators, but I believe the governor did. And she knew early on, well, I shouldn't say that, sometime in early September, that the budget numbers were going to be met or exceeded. In other words, one of her major concerns about that in her mind justified her veto would no longer be a factor. Now, we don't know that, but that's my assumption, because the administrative people who do the numbers work report to her, and so she had the earliest indications of what was going to happen. The other factor that affected the budget was the governor's, her veto rather, was her concern that we were shrinking the size of government with the business tax cuts. The tax cuts were paid for in the sense that the budget was balanced on lower revenue estimates.
In this biennium.
In this
coming biennium.
Right, the budget that we're in now for the current biennium. And so the budget was balanced, but obviously when you reduce taxes, you reduce revenue, so we spent less money. The governor really wanted to spend more money, so she was arguing way back in June, and as a justification for vetoing the budget, that we had to pay for these tax cuts by raising other taxes. And she proposed a cigarette tax increase and a few other things, automobile tax increases. The Republicans were adamant that we weren't going to raise taxes. We had not campaigned on that kind of a platform. We had made voters promises, and we were going to keep them. At the end of the day, the compromise involved the governor caving, my word, on both points. On the first one, with respect to the carryover amount, she had the inside track, and presumably her concerns were assuaged by the information she was getting. So
it's not necessarily a cave, she had better information.
Fair enough, John.
Okay. I mean, to be neutral on this,
okay.
I know I should hype up the political fighting, but that's not our style.
Right. So, on the other issue, the governor, in fact, caved. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. She ultimately came to realize that she was not going to be able to get tax increases, so what she did was to settle for what amounts to a floor. There's a trigger provision that says we're dividing the tax cuts into two phases. Phase one, there's a little tax cut. Phase two, the rest of the tax cut. Phase two doesn't go into effect unless our total revenues, not just revenues from business taxes, but unless our total revenues meet the projections that we had in the budget. Because those are fiscally conservative projections, the Republicans have no qualms whatsoever in putting in place this trigger, because we're very confident that our conservative revenue estimates will be met. So the governor gave up her desire to have a larger budget, accepted the fact that there was going to be a smaller budget, and what she got was a guarantee that it won't be much smaller than the current budget. But she still gave up roughly $90 million of additional taxes that she wanted.
But I mean, it's still relatively prudent, because if we don't hit the targets, those tax decreases won't occur.
The first phase does go into effect and is permanent regardless of whether or not.
Right, but the next phase.
The second 50% of the cuts will not go into effect. She did get something, but this was something that we were prepared to deal with and accept because that was the basis on which we had constructed the budget. She basically said if the budget goes into effect and is real, you can have your tax cuts. And we said, sure.
And Neal, we're out of time with this, but when we return, we're going to continue our conversation about the budget and a little bit of the infighting, so stay with us.